Hi, I'm Amy Rossman, Executive Director of Rodman for Kids, a nonprofit focused on empowering youth charities to build brighter futures for kids, and your co-host of the Brighter Futures podcast.
And I'm Jane Lima, Senior Marketing and Communications Manager at Rodman for Kids, your other co-host of the Brighter Futures podcast, where we tell the stories behind the impact and the people building brighter futures.
This isn't just a podcast about impact. It's about the people behind it, the communities who come together, the connections that drive change, and the shared belief that we can build something better for kids together.
On the Brighter Futures podcast, we shine a light on the partnerships, programs, and people behind the impact. Because brighter futures don't just happen, they're built together. All right, so today's episode is about something that does not get talked about enough, and that is what it actually takes to make programs accessible for all kids. Through our Theater for Kids program, we've seen firsthand how powerful the arts can be, but only if every single child who enters a theater feels safe, supported, and welcome in that space.
Today, we're joined by Sue Valenti from the Doug Flutie Jr. Foundation for Autism to talk about inclusive theater experiences and why accessibility is essential, not optional. Sue joined the Doug Flutie Foundation in December of 2022. In her current role as development manager, Sue supports a wide array of fundraising initiatives with new and existing corporate partners and supports the development department through relationship management, partnership cultivation, and event logistics, as well as acting as an ambassador for the Flutie Foundation. Prior to joining the Flutie Foundation, Sue worked in finance roles for several Fortune 500 companies, as well as smaller organizations. She holds an MBA in Finance and Marketing from Adelphi University and a bachelor's degree from the State University of New York in Business Economics. Sue is the mom of a 25-year-old young man with profound autism and enjoys gardening, the beach, and traveling, as well as spending time with her Black lab and family in Massachusetts and New York. Well, welcome to the Brighter Futures podcast, Sue. We're so excited to have you here.
Thanks, Amy and Jane. I'm really excited to be here with you today.
As I was reading your bio, I think what came to mind automatically, and this is the case with so many nonprofits, is that even though you're on the business and development side, you're still very much an ambassador for the organization and involved in the programmatic aspects too, which is a lot of what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
And would just love to start out by hearing from you. When you think about an inclusive experience for kids, what does that really mean to you?
I think, it can mean a lot of different things depending on what audience you're talking to. So from the autism community perspective, I think what it really means is about giving everybody the ability to access a particular event or show and meet them where they are rather than the event having to dictate how things are managed. I think it's about making people feel comfortable, included, and being able to participate. Things like sensory-friendly performances, flexible seating, relaxed audience expectations, really allow people to enjoy and experience the event in the way that they want to.
Yeah.
It's a great segue, Sue, because when this podcast episode airs, we're going to be just a few days out from our buyout sensory-friendly performance of Beauty and the Beast. So we'll be bringing more than 2,000 kids to the Boston Opera House for a sensory-friendly performance of Beauty and the Beast. And it's so important to Rodman for Kids when we're looking at our Theater for Kids program to make sure that we're opening the doors to theater for kids of all different abilities. And that's, why we're so well aligned and able to work together. What do you think people most often misunderstand about accessibility, specifically when it comes to the performing arts?
I think one of the things that, many people think about is they think about the physical accommodations. So if they're in a wheelchair, making sure it's handicapped accessible, or perhaps they're hard of hearing or have some kind of hearing impairment, having American Sign Language interpreters. So more, they're thinking more about the physical aspects rather than the social and emotional and neurological aspects.
The arts can be accessible. And it's just making sure that we're putting those steps into place so that every kid can feel welcome and included in that space. So when thinking of what is a traditional theater experience, what are some of the biggest barriers that you have seen families face when attending those performances?
So I think, again, there's several, and it can vary a lot from family to family. For the neurodiverse community, I think one of the biggest barriers is a lot of people have sensory sensitivities, and I think that's a major concern, like loud sounds, sudden lighting changes, strobe lights, crowded spaces. And then the other thing is there's also a fear of judgment, right? Yes. So families always worry, what happens if my child flaps their hands? What if my child gets out of their seat? What if my child makes noise? What if my child needs a break? Traditional theater settings can feel so rigid, and many families feel that their kiddos need to be very quiet and be very still. And that can make families very hesitant to participate in a theater event or take their child to the theater. And then there's logistical barriers. So there's a cost, right? Families with autism spend an average of over $60,000 a year out of pocket on expenses for their child because many things aren't covered by insurance. There's lack of transportation. There's lack of understanding or communication about what to expect. Maybe they've never gone to a theater performance. If families don't know whether a performance will meet their child's needs, it can be a big risk to take.
Yeah, absolutely. And so jumping off of that, what adjustments do you find truly make a theater experience sensory friendly, accessible for all?
Yeah. So I think, a couple of things that we've done in the past is, production companies have turned the lights up a little bit so that it's not so dark. They allow individuals to bring iPads and to play with an iPad, of course, with headphones on during the performance. Again, if they get bored or if they just need like a little break. There's also an opportunity that we've had at many performances where we have sensory spaces for people to go to, or a quiet area. If they need to take a break, they can go there, and we'll have sensory tools available for them. We also can provide noise-canceling headphones for individuals so that if the sound does get too loud, they can put on their headphones, and that will reduce or eliminate a lot of that background noise and distraction.
When you were talking about the families and sort of the stress around how their child might behave or receive the theater experience, I think one of the things that really stands out to me, particularly when we do a buyout and the entire theater is kids and families, is that piece is completely removed, right? You're in an audience of educators and program leaders and kids who are so much more understanding and forgiving than a lot of the grownups around them. And it's just like, come in and show up as you are and experience this in the way that works for your kid and your family. And it's something we're really proud to be able to do, but we couldn't do it without partnership from organizations like the Flutie Foundation. Especially, you guys, in addition to helping us get kids to the theater, you've been incredible advisors for us in terms of, what adjustments we can make to make sure we're doing these sensory friendly shows the right way. And I'd love for you to speak a little bit to how organizations like ours can collaborate to make these experiences possible.
Right. So I think, one of the things is that, no one organization can do it all, right? So we all have little areas of expertise. Accessibility is multifaceted. As we spoke about earlier, it touches on the design of the event, educating the community, educating the staff at the event, communication, building trust with families that it's going to be okay. Don't worry about it. You can come in, you can relax, no judgment, just be who you are and show up. And we each bring different perspectives, the partner organizations, which leads to, very thoughtful programming, effective programming, and programming that people walk away with feeling just so joyful that they were able to attend an event. And, working together, as you said, Jane, we can, Amy, we can create more opportunities to touch more families and provide more opportunities for inclusion than an individual family could do by themselves.
Yeah. I think back to the Holiday Pops sensory friendly performance that we collaborated on back in December now, which feels like it was last week, but was actually 4 months ago, which is wild. And just thinking about a space that was, like you mentioned, like the entire group was people who understood what it's like to have a sensory need. And so just the joy on the kids' faces, dancing with Santa in the aisles, and I'll shout out our partners at Boston Symphony Orchestra who were so intentional with every single part of that day, down to the conductor, just how he addressed the kids at the beginning of the performance, saying like, you do whatever you want to do because this is for you. And I think hearing that before every theater performance, before every activity, is so important for all kids to hear, that just you can show up as you are, like you were just saying, Sue. I think it's invaluable.
Neurodivergent, neurotypical, like just for kids to know this is for you. You're not the exception. This is for you.
Yes.
Yeah, I know. It was really interesting. When we did go to Holiday Pops, I brought my son. And as we mentioned, he's 24. He's profoundly autistic. And he just loves to dance. And he was just dancing the whole time to all the Christmas music and singing along and clapping his hands. And the joy that brought to him that day was just amazing. And, as you said, the BSO was just phenomenal. And, prior to the performance in the lobby, there was an opportunity to play instruments, and all the musicians were so kind and compassionate about showing an individual how to hold a particular instrument, how to play the instrument. It was just amazing.
It's an incredible day. So we're talking about partnership. We're talking about these collaborations. How does those shared goals really strengthen these experiences between partners, whether it be Rodman for Kids and the Flutie Foundation, between the BSO and these organizations? What does that shared goal really strengthen?
I think the shared goal strengthens just the impact that it has on the community, and creates such a powerful experience for everyone involved that they just can enjoy these performances like they have never before. It just provides new opportunities for them to experience the performing arts.
And like you said too soon, no one organization can do it all. We need you to advise us on what we should be doing. And then we need the performing arts organizations to help us implement it. It takes the whole village to make it happen, but it's so powerful when it does.
Yeah.
So thinking about sitting in an actual performance in a theater full of kids, what have you seen happen, Sue, when a child feels fully included and welcome at a performance?
Yeah. It's pretty amazing. I think you can just see the difference right away. Kids relax, they open up, they get excited, they dance, they're clapping their hands. They're not worried about doing the wrong thing, or somebody saying, use a quiet voice, or, sit down, or don't flap your hands, hold your fidget toy, don't flap. And that's just huge. They're not being meant to fit into that space that wasn't designed for them. The space is actually designed with them in mind, right? And it doesn't just affect the child. Families just have that sense of relief, as I mentioned before, and gratitude. They're able to share an experience without stress, without worrying. They're not on edge the whole time. They really just get an opportunity to enjoy being there together with their family, which is something that many times they just can't do. And it really, stays with families. This resonates with families. Those memories that it creates, just last even after the performance ends. I know my family, we just look forward to every year going to Holiday Pops. And we've been going to the sensory friendly performance for probably like 15 years. It's just an annual event now that's a memory that we have, and we can just relax and enjoy together as a family.
You talked about your son at the Holiday Pops. And actually, as we're talking about that, I was thinking about having been to the traditional performance, which is phenomenal. The joy exuded at the sensory friendly performance, that's the better take for me. I mean, just because it's unbridled. Even as adults, we sit prim and proper with our hands in our lap. We can't sing along or dance along. And I really just appreciated just the complete unfiltered joy at the sensory friendly performance. And aside from your son experiencing that, is there another moment or a specific kid or instance that comes to mind for you that really captures why this work is so important and why it matters?
Yeah, I think another experience that is a big highlight for me is we had the opportunity to buy out the house for Blue Man Group. And you'd think that Blue Man Group, is sensory overload. But however, there are a lot of people that does not bother them. Mm-hmm. There are many individuals where loud noises, flashing lights doesn't bother them. And again, to make that experience inclusive for all, we did make modifications to that show, but there are others that just love that. So we had one of our autism self-advocates for the Flutie Foundation. He just loves going to that performance, and he actually wanted to be picked as one of the audience participation members. And he also, at the beginning of the performance, had an opportunity to deliver some opening remarks on what it meant to him. And just seeing his joy and him getting up, standing in front of a huge theater of people to tell them that, what his name was, what his story was, and that he got to participate. He was just so excited to do that. And I think, that just brought such joy to not only, his family, but all the other families around.
That's awesome. It's a good reminder too that what we think of as sensory overload, or, I remember when we first did our first sensory friendly buyout of Blue Man Group, I thought, like, how are they going to make this sensory friendly? There is nothing less sensory friendly than the Blue Man Group. But to your point, I think for those of us who were less educated on this at the time, like, those needs are different for every kid. And there was a theater full of 500 kids and families for whom that was the perfect experience. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's great.
So Thinking about what's ahead, how can communities really continue to expand access to the arts and make it accessible for all kids?
I think it comes down to building these partnerships with organizations. So whether it's with Broadway in Boston, the Boston Symphony Orchestra, it's really working with other organizations and groups so that they understand that there's an unmet need out there that we need to join together and meet that need. We want as many people as possible to be able to enjoy these experiences. And it really does take true collaboration between a whole army of different organizations working together to make these things happen. Whether it's a performing arts show or it's a concert or it's an exhibit at a museum, I think we just need to work together because there's no reason why people who are neurodiverse or who have other disabilities should be denied access to these types of experiences.
Absolutely.
As I'm listening to you, Sue, I'm imagining maybe listeners of the podcast who aren't doing the work that we're doing might be thinking, how could I help? So in a situation where someone is in a more traditional audience at a theater or wherever it might be, what is something as a fellow audience member or a fellow visitor to the museum that we can be doing to make sure the people around us feel included?
I think what's really helpful is just not to pass judgment. Let people be who they are. Somebody may be staring into space. Somebody may be flapping their hands. Somebody may be grabbing something. But just let people be who they are and be curious about what they're doing. Perhaps at times there's assistance that can be provided and when you see a family that may be in some need. But also I think the big thing is just placing no judgment.
Yeah. Understanding and empathy goes a long way.
Yeah. Good rule of thumb for all facets of life. It's a good rule of thumb.
And just, be kind. That's my motto. Be kind.
Be kind.
Good takeaway. Good takeaway. Well, before we wrap up, Sue, we love to ask this question of all of our guests. What is a person, activity, or moment from your childhood that helped shape who you are today?
Honestly, I think it comes back to my parents. So I grew up in a large family. I'm one of 6 children, and we're all pretty close in age. And I really think my parents helped shape not only me, but my siblings as well. There was always a really strong sense of family. We were there for one another. We showed up for one another. We made time for one another. And that was just a given in our house, like family first. But beyond that, I think the thing that my parents really instilled upon all of us was giving back. My parents were very generous, not necessarily financially because we didn't have a lot of money growing up, but they were generous with their time, which is, I think, more important. And with having 6 children, they really supported all of our activities and became very involved in our activities, whether it's my dad was the Boy Scout leader or my mom was the Girl Scout leader or driving us to, events or volunteering a lot at our school and fundraising for our schools or, my dad giving back to the community, helping people who were underserved. It was really about, we were so fortunate and so blessed that my parents really instilled on us the value of giving back. So I think, that really has made an impact on my personal life. And that's why I chose to join the Flutie Foundation. As you mentioned in the intro, I worked for over 35 years in corporate finance leadership. And, I got to the point in my life where I had raised my family and I wanted to do something different. And I really wanted to give back. And I really wanted to help the autism community, being the parent of a child with autism. And I had so many trailblazers in front of me that helped me along me and my family along our autism journey, that now it's my opportunity to help others. So it's a combination of like my parents as well as, just having a son with profound autism and being very fortunate to have many trailblazers in front of me that have helped my family. And now it's my time to give back.
And what a blessing you are to the families that you're supporting because you've walked in their shoes. You still walk in their shoes, right? So you really have a deep understanding of where they're coming from and what they're dealing with.
And that's, as you mentioned earlier, Amy, my specific role at the Flutie Foundation is more about development and corporate partnerships, but I love to get involved in a lot of the programming aspects because I understand I've walked the walk and now I can talk the talk and help other families.
Sue, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your insight both personally and professionally. You really helped us to better understand what inclusivity looks like, especially at the theater. And thank you for the work you do that ensures every child has access to all the wonderful experiences that they deserve. We really appreciate you.
We will leave our listeners with a reflection question. Where in your life could a small adjustment make someone else feel more included?
Thank you for listening to the Brighter Futures podcast. If this conversation resonated with you, please consider sharing it or leaving us a review. To learn more about Theater for Kids and our partners, visit rodmanforkids.org. And to learn more about the Doug Flutie Jr. Foundation for Autism, visit FlutieFoundation.org.